Grand Rising Soul Family. Adam Jackson here with a special episode of the Sacred Sons podcast. Today we're coming to you live from Sacred Sons Leadership Training Summit in Orlando, Florida, out here in the swamplands with the Gators. And I'm honored to bring through a guest. He's come all the way across the pond from Devon, UK. His name is Maisey. And brothers and sisters, is change really possible? This is a question that we as men have to consider. Is it possible to have real change? Change in our thought pattern with our words, behaviors, and actions. And so Michael is one who has a story of real change and a triumph of the will. So with that, our guest today, he is the founder of the CIP Project, Change is Possible, and he is the author of Young Offender. And he's a sacred son. Please welcome Michael Maisey.
Thank you.
It's an honor, brother.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Adam. It's good to be here.
Yeah.
And good to be here in Florida as well with the Suns. Proud to be a part of it.
With the Suns, with the Gators, with the swamp.
Yeah.
And so this question that I'm proposing is real change possible? Is lasting change possible? And I've heard bits of your story. And so I just wanted to start here with the CIP. Mm-hmm. And you do work in prisons. You go into prisons and bring through men's work, bring through these tools and these processes for men in our society who have gone through some of the deepest struggles and challenges, both in the form of addiction and having tumultuous pasts. And so what do you see in your work? What do you see in these men when you go into these spaces?
Yeah. Well, what I see is myself, and the reason I take it in there is because I got to this specific point in my journey. So I got sober at the age of 25. And I got sober through the 12-step program and the fellowship. Mm-hmm. And when everyone hit about a year to 2 years, they were like really happy, like their lives were improving. And I was just filled with all this pain. It was like I didn't have this emotional crutch to help me deal with all the difficult things that happened in my past. And until I discovered this men's work movement, which would be back in like 2014. And then I realized, in order for me to change, really change, be everything that I wanted my father to be, a loyal, committed husband and a good father, I had to go back. I had to look at all the wounds that I was carrying. Yeah. And I guess that's what I see when I go into the prisons. A lot of these guys don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
So they don't even know they're living in the dark because they've always lived in the dark.
Yeah.
And that was my story. It was like, I didn't know I was living in the dark because it was the only way I knew how to live.
Yeah. It's just life.
It was just my life.
Yeah.
And so that's a way of bringing some hope in through my lived experience with my charity, the CIP Project.
Yeah.
Is like, look, I'm not in here as some guru or a saint. You read my life story, you can see I'm not a saint. I've been to prison myself.
Yeah.
But I have picked up some tools that have helped me transform my life, be a loyal husband and a committed father.
Yeah.
And I'm just here to give you them and see if any of these land with you. And what we found is for a lot of these men, it's, it's mind-blowing stuff. Even when you break it down to the most simple process of just getting two men eye to eye, talking about something like sadness. Talk to me about your sadness.
And the sorrow.
Yeah.
We touched on that earlier today.
Yeah, right. And it's like some of these men, they're like in their 40s and they've never spoke to another man about their sadness. They've never told them about all the sad things that's happened to them in their life.
Yeah.
And so it's like these real simple techniques that I've learned over the years, just giving them and watching it land and, watching the lights come back on in someone's eyes and they're like, crikey, this is so simple but so powerful.
Yeah. And so what is the real substance that allows change to happen from what you've seen? I believe it's community. In Sacred Sons, we're about brotherhood and we're about connection. And I believe that it's the connection and for us, it's connection between men that allows accountability, integrity to be something worth striving for. What do you see as the catalyst for change?
Exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's connection, you know, but the first piece of that when working with prisoners is the lived experience. So in my experience, they have to see someone who's been where they've been and who's found a way out. Yeah. Otherwise, it's not credible. You know, so like in the UK, I gave a talk in the Houses of Parliament.
Oh, wow.
And the theme of my talk was that there needs to be more emphasis on lived experience over the qualifications you might get at a university.
Yeah.
When you're recruiting people to work in the prison service. Yeah. Because at the moment, when you fill out the application form, it's changed now, you know, but back then, it would ask all your qualifications. There was nothing on the application form about lived experience. But when you're working in the prison system, the lived experience is what builds the rapport and the trust with the men.
Trust.
Yeah.
Trust is key.
Yeah. And so the inspirational story is what will get the men there. They're like, crikey, you've found a way through? Show me how. That's what gets them to attend the workshops in the prison.
Yeah.
But then ultimately it's a connection. Yeah. But not just a connection to other men, it's also about connecting to yourself, to your story, to the things that you've tried to hide and repress and deny.
Yeah.
The parts of yourself, you know you could be doing a lot better. And there's certain things you need to be doing more of. And it's like just uncovering all of that and building that connection with yourself, but also with the brothers in there.
Yeah, and so you steward land, you lead men on rites of passage, you're a father to 3 daughters, you're a devoted husband, but that's not always been the picture. You know, so when I look at you here today, I'm like, I see somebody who appears to have it together and to have center. And, you know, you've shown me like a photo of yourself, like, hey man, this is me too. Like, this is who I was, you know, before I went in. Or maybe it was the day you got out even.
It was the day I got out, yeah.
So let's go back and tap into that version of you. What was life like for young Michael, you know, on the streets of the UK, and what was that like? Yeah,
so my mum was an Irish immigrant. So she come from a big traveller family. You know, some people refer to it as gypsies.
Yeah.
But I refer to it as travellers. And so she come from a big traveller family, and she had a pre-arranged marriage to a rival traveller family, which was quite common back then. It was a way of settling feuds. So if my family was fighting your family and we got to a point where there's been too many casualties, we'd say, right, your son's going to marry my daughter. Yeah. Now we're related. Now the beef is squashed. And
that's how you squash the beef? By merging the family?
Yeah, like a pre-arranged marriage.
Wow.
And so this is what they had for my mum when she was 16.
Oh, shit.
And my mum was like, I'm not marrying this guy who was like 10 years her senior. You know, she was like, I'm not doing that. So she got on like a boat to England, hoping for a better life. And she arrived in England in the sort of late 1950s, early 1960s, and there was like signs on the doors that said, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. And that was on the sign of hotels, restaurants, pubs.
Yeah.
So she was met with this like racism, basically, because she was Irish. And in the middle of like navigating and finding her way through all of that, she found my dad. You know, my dad was also from Irish background, but he was like first generation of Irish immigrants. And she found in him the protector that she was looking for. So she was always looking like, someone come and save me. And my dad was like sort of quite a tough guy, you know, would drink, would fight. And so she sought that in him, that protection. But ultimately they were both drinkers, and my dad used to use drugs, and they had a very hostile relationship. So my dad ended up leaving before I was 1.
Yeah.
And he went on to have another 15 children. So I'm one of 15 from my dad. And then I was predominantly raised by my mum. But the sort of defining moment in my childhood that really changed the course of everything for me was when I was at the age of 5. You know, so being raised on a poor council estate with lots of immigrant families, I didn't know any different. I was just like, this is just life.
Right.
You know, I didn't know what I didn't know. But when my uncle came to live with us at the age of 5, and he grew up in a children's home in Ireland run by Catholic priests and nuns who sexually abused him.
Yeah.
He'd done the same to me for about 6 months. And there was like bullying, intimidation, mild forms of torture. And it was at this moment, and I say this looking back in hindsight, where I made this sort of clear decision in my mind, this world isn't a friendly place.
Wow.
You know, I looked out at the world and I was like, if this is what the people you live with are gonna do to you.
Right. The people who are supposed to be your protectors.
Yeah. If this is what they're gonna do, like what's the outside world gonna be like?
Yeah.
And how are you gonna survive? So it seems a lot to run through, but I say all this looking back in hindsight, having done lots of work around this.
Yes.
And so the technique I developed was to be loud, angry, and unpredictable as a young boy. So now you might label that as like BPD, borderline personality disorder, ADHD, or something like that.
Right.
But it was a technique that worked well for me. So if I was loud and angry and unpredictable as a little kid,
no one's gonna fuck with you.
Yeah, well, most adults are like, I don't even want to be near that kid. Keep that kid away from me.
And you, as this young man, don't want to be anywhere near these adults.
Yeah.
I want to stop here and say that I think the statistics say something like, 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 young men have been sexually abused, molested, something like that. In the work that we do, I actually think it's much higher, and there's much fewer people speaking about it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so thank you for sharing that piece. Mm-hmm. So yeah,
I would agree with you, Adam.
Yeah,
because I know for me, I didn't talk about it.
And in fact, I also understand you were threatened to not talk about it.
Yeah, that was one of the techniques my uncle used.
Yeah.
Through the bullying and intimidation. If you ever tell anyone, like, I'm gonna find you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hurt you more, and no one would believe you anyway. So
yeah.
I also grew up in a world where, there was a lot of stigma around being gay.
Right.
And so I didn't know how to make sense of all of this. Like, my first experience of any type of touch in that area of my body was with another man.
Right.
So I was like, am I gay? Does that make me gay?
It's so confusing.
It was just confusing. I was just a young kid trying to figure out, like, I don't really understand what's happened here.
Yeah.
But the strategy to keep safe was to be loud and angry and unpredictable, And sadly, with that, I grew up on a council estate with lots of other kids who were the same. So I suspect it happened to a lot of other kids.
Right.
But we were all loud and angry and unpredictable. And when we came together, I call it a council estate. I think in America, you guys call it the projects or something like that.
Ghetto projects.
The projects, yeah. But when we were all together, us as a group of kids, that was like the only time we all really felt safe. When we was all together. Because we knew anyone tries messing with us, all of us are gonna be on you.
Yeah.
But you live that life, and I chased this illusion that, the scared boy who was abused isn't me. I am this guy, the loud, angry, unpredictable guy.
Yeah.
And it landed me in like quite a bit of trouble as a teenager.
Is there a piece in there like where you're longing for your father, like to protect you or to come back around? Was that a thought that you even had?
Yeah, there was that. It was like a fantasy. It was like, maybe one day he's gonna knock on the door and rescue me.
Yeah.
Even though all the stories of Dad were negative from Mum. My mum would say things, and I love my mum, we've got a great relationship now, but some of the things she said to me were really damaging when she was in her alcoholism. One of the things was, you're just like your father.
Oh, shit.
Anytime I would show any sign of aggression, oh, you're just like your father. So it was like this other part of myself that I had to hide. It's like, oh, my anger isn't welcome, even though I've got a lot of things to be justifiably angry about. And so it was like a real confusing environment. Is like I had to hide that bit of myself from my mum because I couldn't even, Dad wasn't around to get the love from.
And she doesn't know the source of your actual anger.
Yes, that's
and
right.
what actually has happened,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, my mum didn't know until pretty much, I would say like 6 months before my life story was published.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All the way up until the book was written.
All the way up to the book was written. So I spoke about it when I got sober to my mentor, but I didn't feel strong enough to tell my family.
Yeah.
You know, and it took a while for my mum to get her head around that.
To accept it.
To accept it, yeah.
We've all heard the saying that hurt people. And even from the perspective of now, I know that you have the understanding that this also happened to your uncle by these priests who were effectively a group of pedophiles who were, you know, bringing children into their, you know, into their spaces.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is a sickness that exists in the culture. So I appreciate you sharing it and kind of like naming it. Because I don't think that change in this realm actually is possible unless we name it.
Yeah,
unless we call it out. You know what I mean?
I agree. And also another piece of that, Adam, is about the men who have been through it and found a way out. It's really important you share it, like what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
Because I'm giving unconscious permission to the men who've been through that you can do it too, that you can talk about it. You know, the shame isn't yours to carry. The shame was his.
Right.
You know?
Right.
But like you said, you know, I come to a place of forgiveness for my uncle because he was taken into the children's home at the age of about 2. And the children's home in Ireland was run by Catholic priests, nuns, and back then they had a volunteer system. So you could come and volunteer in the children's home. And there was no vetting. There was no security vetting. Yeah. So paedophiles would just come in and say, I'm coming in to cut the grass or do this or teach violin And so paedophiles would just come in and out. And so that's all my uncle knew. He didn't know any different.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean what he done is okay, but it helps me understand that he wasn't born evil. He wasn't born that way. You know, life happened to him too.
Right. And so just like in the ghettos and the projects in America, drugs are going around in your community. And as you're getting older, when did you first kind of come to the realization of these drugs, or, you know, potentially of being on the corners and selling and being in that economy?
Yeah, for me it was young. With alcohol it was young. It was like 10, 11, something like that. I'd have some alcohol, but it was really, the hard stuff was like 12, about 12 years old. And
12 years old.
12 years
What's
old.
the hard stuff?
Back then it was crack and heroin. I know there's a whole range of drugs now that is all different, but it was crack and heroin.
At 12 years old?
Yeah. Yeah, at 12. Yeah. Yeah, we used to smoke the heroin in like a spliff. Yeah. The same way you'd smoke marijuana.
Yeah.
You just sprinkle it in. And I think there was so much taboo around it in my community growing up. You know, there was like the crack and heroin dealers and they earned, you know, loads of money, and it was like, oh, what is this stuff? What is this? You know, everyone was like, you mustn't ever smoke it. You get addicted to it. And it created this intrigue within us. It's like, I want to try it, and I want to, like, there's so much stuff around this.
And the drug dealers get glorified in those communities, right? Because they're the only ones that have money.
Adam, they were our role models. They were our missing fathers.
Oh, wow.
That's the role that they took. When we looked up for healthy masculinity, they're the only ones that were there.
Yeah.
It was the drug dealers. You know, so it was like, when I say I didn't know what I didn't know, like, that's a good example of that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I didn't know healthy masculinity, you know?
Yeah. And so from there, you're using, I'm imagining at some point you become addicted. Was there a build up to selling and ultimately to when you became incarcerated as a young man?
Yeah. So I used the drugs, but I never used them in an addictive way where I used them every day and I became physically dependent until later on. But at the age of 15, I got convicted of armed robbery and possession of firearms, which back then was a big deal in London because it's you know, there's not a lot of 15-year-old armed robbers in London, especially back then. So it was a big deal. And, you know, I went on to spend, you know, time in prison after that. And I had this experience in prison where I almost died on my first prison sentence. Mm-hmm. You know, one of the sort of codes of the street is like, if you go to prison, you ain't got to win the fight, you've just got to fight. You just need to let them know not to mess with you. And so I went in with that attitude. And so on like my first sort of couple of weeks, I had a fight with like the toughest kid on the wing. His name was Pepsi. Because, he was a small black guy, but really, really stocky. So he was like a can of Pepsi. And everyone called him Pepsi. And we had a fight in the showers. And, and you know, like I would say I got lucky because you're slipping over everywhere and, you know, you're half naked. But I caught him and he hit the deck and then he hit his head and everyone put me like, whoa, Maisey is, he's done Pepsi. Yeah. And I got like elevated to this position of like power, which I didn't really deserve.
Okay. But I want to say right here, you're a traveler. You're a gypsy.
Yeah.
It's in your blood, no? The ability to fight, the culture of fighting exists in that community.
Yeah. That's sort of in my gypsy traveler culture. That's the two things is, you know, drinking and fighting. Yeah. You know, and I believe both of them come from a place of where our race of people have been oppressed and displaced. You know, and still oppressed now, I would say. Yeah. But there's a lot of history around that.
Well, I just say, like, as Americans, we know Snatch, you know. Yeah. We know this character of Brad Pitt in a way, like, and is there a part of your story that has the essence of that? Just like the drinking, fighting, traveling, and then...
So for me, and, you know, my relatives who see themselves as descendants of the Unlook Shul, which in Irish Gaelic means the walking people, you know, we found that film to be quite racist. Yeah. You know, like referring to us as pikeys is like a derogatory way to describe our people. And I feel like we were depicted in a way in that movie as just the Irish drunken fool who fights, when there's actually so much more to our culture that just wasn't shown. Yeah. You know, like back in Ireland, we were viewed as the original kings of Ireland. Wow. Because when, you know, people tried to colonise Ireland, like the British ruled Ireland for over 700 years, and the travellers just kept moving from town to town, and they would bring culture with them, new songs, new food, new stories. So when the Unlook Shul people would come to your village, they'd be celebrated. And the Unlook Shul would say, like, why are you guys staying in one place? Let's go south. We can grow more crops for longer. Yeah. Like, why are you staying in one place? Wow. And so we were viewed as the kings because we'd come and they'd go, oh, we've got some new songs for you and we've got some new stories. Similar to how the Hawaiians would go from island to island. Yeah. You know? But really it was under the British occupation that the travelling people really got oppressed. You know, when Britain ruled Ireland for over 700 years, they made it illegal to speak Irish Gaelic. And the traveller people, we used to speak, it's really hard to find it now, but we used to speak a language that was similar to Gaelic, but it was called Shelter. And the British believed that was like Morse code. Yeah. So it was illegal to speak Irish Gaelic, but if you spoke the traveller language Shelter, a language that they had no way of translating, it was like really bad. Yeah. I think it's also important to note that the colonization of Ireland is still happening in Northern Ireland. That's right. I mean, is there a piece that you could just speak here for the education and enlightenment of those who are listening? Like, you know, I've talked to about it many times with Kale. I've talked about it with others who have indigenous roots. That colonization is something that is still happening right now. Yeah. And for us to have an awareness of it is important, I feel. Yeah. So it's really important for people who've got any Irish in their lineage to know the history of their homelands.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the saddest parts is the oppression of the Irish by the British. And one of the things they've done, especially in the north, because some of the most fierce fighters who opposed British rule were in the north.
Right.
So when the British came, they made it illegal to own land. So they took everyone's land, all the farmers' land, said that's now owned by us. And you had to pay rent to some guy in London for your land. That was one of the things they'd done. Now, eventually, after 700 years and after the Easter Rising and the Irish Civil War, they came to an agreement. And the agreement was the south of Ireland is going to become Irish again, but the north of Ireland has a choice whether they stay or remain. It was a very clever move because what the British had done over the past, 700-800 years, they'd moved loads of English and Scottish Protestant settlers into the north and made it illegal to own land in the north.
Right. So it wasn't much of a choice.
So when it went to a vote, the Catholic population was so small, it was never going to win the vote.
Right.
And so Northern Ireland stayed part of Britain.
Yeah.
And so when, you hear people condemning in the UK, we condemn the war in Ukraine, it's a bit hypocritical in my eyes because it's like, well, we still own the north of Ireland. It's like, to put that in perspective, Adam, that's like Russia saying, we now own Canada. Canada is called Russia, and it's illegal to speak English in Russia, in Canada.
Right.
You have to speak Russian.
Right.
And that's what happened.
And that's what's happening.
It's happening right now.
Yeah, I think it's just a lot of times we look at the history books as if history has somehow stopped happening. And it's still being perpetuated. And so if change is really possible, again, we have to call out these things and to name them. So let's go back in. Pepsi hits the deck.
Yeah.
You're in for the first time. I know that you've been in and out, right? Like a few times.
Yeah, 3 times I was in and out.
3 times. So let's talk about the time where you go back in for the last time.
Okay.
And let's talk about where the change actually began in your journey, in your story.
Okay, all right. When I came out of prison the first time, I had a genuine desire. I don't want to go back. And I went to all the jobs that I thought I could get. And I got no. And then I went for jobs I sort of would, and I got no's. And then I went for any job, and I got a no. And my last chance saloon was, I'm going to join the army and be cannon fodder on the front line in some war zone. And I went there, and as soon as I mentioned my conviction for possession of firearms, they literally just said, just get out of the office. There's no way you're coming into the military with a firearms conviction. We're not going to put a loaded weapon in your hand. And that was it. I left that careers office. I went straight back to my community. I got straight back into crime, and I was back in prison in 2 weeks.
Wow.
So when I went back to prison, I came out the second time. When I came out the second time, I didn't even try and get a job. I went straight back to the street corner. I was like, how are we making money? And it was like the late 90s, and there was like a crack and heroin epidemic in the UK. Everyone was using crack and heroin. Like, it was around before, but now it was like widespread. Even like the rich white middle class were using crack and heroin. Yeah. It became like a cool new thing. And so I started selling it and also using it. And over the course of, a period of time, I became addicted to it, to the crack and heroin, without even knowing I was addicted to it. So eventually I get arrested, I get taken to the police station, and I'm like, I don't feel right. I really don't feel right. And
you got arrested for possession, for selling?
For
at
possession,
this time?
and a whole lot of other stuff. There was assault on police. They sort of at that point had gone, just let Michael rack up some charges so we can send him away.
Right, because you went in as a 15-year-old originally.
I just turned 16. It was like a week after my 16th birthday.
And so how old are you when you're going back in for this time?
For this final time, I was 18.
You're 18.
Yeah. So I go back in this time as like a heroin addict. When I see the doctor's like, how much heroin were you using? And I was like, I don't know, probably like 2 grams a day, something like that. He was like, whoa. He was like, you need to take this, and when you get to prison, you're going to be detoxed.
Yeah.
So now I realise, crikey, I'm fully dependent on heroin.
Yeah. And that you're going to go have these withdrawals in a cell.
In a cell, right.
Yeah.
So I go into prison and they say to me, right, you got 2 choices. You got a long drawn out detox over a long period of time, or we got this new drug that it can flush you out in 7 days. So me being like the tough guy, I'm like, just give me the quick one. I'll just ride this out. They've since banned that detox now because so many people killed themselves off the back of it. So I'm like sort of 2 days into the detox, and I mean, it was like hell on earth, you know. Having seen things like my daughter being born and seen that felt like heaven to me.
Yes.
I believe that
this is the opposite.
That was the opposite. It was like detoxing in that prison cell was like I was experiencing hell. And suicide, I'd known guys on the wing who'd committed suicide before, so I had a rough idea how to do it. And it was like this idea that was far away. And then as time went
7
on,
days.
Yeah.
brings that idea.
It was only 48 hours. And the idea came closer and closer and closer. And then in the end, it was like right here. And it was like a voice screaming in my ear, like, you ain't going nowhere. You may as well do your family a favor and just end it now. You're going to be no better than your father. You're a lowlife. You've got no qualifications. You can't even get a job. Just do yourself a favor. Just kill yourself. This was like, some people might refer to this as the ego or the devil or whatever, but that's the voice that was in my head at the time.
Yeah.
And it talked me into taking my own life. You know? And that was it.
And this is done by using sheets to make a noose type of thing in prison.
So you roll the bed sheet up, so it's like a rope.
Yeah.
You know, and I remember when I'd done it, I was like, I'm sure I'm going to mess this up first time.
That's a funny thought.
Because I'm like, I'm so messed up. I'm like, I don't even know if this is going to work. And I'm like putting it all around the bars, and then I roll off the bed and it's like in that moment, I didn't want to die. Literally within a second, I was like, shit, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. How do I get this off? I want to get it off. And you're like struggling with it, and you can't vocalize anything because it's so tight.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wriggled about, I would say, for like a minute or so. And then slowly the oxygen depletes, and then I arrived at this place of just thinking about my mum and thinking about my younger brother and sister. And just this remorse of like, fuck, man, this is how I'm gonna die in this prison cell.
Wow, this is all happening.
This is like all happening like really slowly.
Yeah.
And then then that was like the last thing I remembered, just this remorse of that this is how it was gonna end for me.
Wow.
And then the next thing I remember was I'm on the floor. I'm laying on the floor, and I can see like a light, and it was the light on the ceiling of the prison cell. And I'm on the floor of the prison cell, and they're doing CPR on me, bringing me back to life. And, I only found out afterwards that like the prison officer, he came in to tell me like a few days after, he said, I don't know why, Michael. I was sitting there like doing a crossword in the newspaper, and I just suddenly thought, I'm gonna go and do the rounds. And he closed the newspaper, and he said, if I had have started on the left-hand side of the wing or on the top floor, you would be dead. He was like, I started on the ground floor on the right-hand side, you were 3 cells in, and I come and cut you down and brought you back to life.
And so this is, I mean, my judgment or my imagining is like, this is an angel for you. I know he's a prison guard, but this is a miraculous moment. Because without his intuition or whatever that is that causes him to get up and to walk to that cell, you're not here sitting here right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not a deeply religious guy.
And probably certainly not at that time.
Yeah, and I wasn't at that time. But after they brought me back to life, they put me in a padded cell. And I mean, everything was padded, the floor, the walls, even they had a toilet in there, but it was all cushioned. And even the button to flush the toilet was a flush button on the wall. So you couldn't even smash your head off anything.
Yeah.
And I just remember laying there in the fetal position, and I was just like, if there's something out there, if there's some God out there, I need you now. I need you to help me now. And I never had saw some white guy in the cloud riding a horse or any crazy stuff like that. The only thing that happened was I didn't feel alone. That was the only way, looking back, my mind can describe the feeling.
Yeah.
I didn't feel any physical touch. I just suddenly felt, oh, I'm not on my own. There's something here.
Even inside this padded, isolated cell, you felt the presence of something.
It was something, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't like to say I felt the presence of God. It was because it just manifested as a feeling of I didn't feel alone. It was like there was something here I could communicate with and lean on for support. Which sounds, it might sound quite small, but for me, growing up in an environment where I didn't even have my own mum to count on. That was massive.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of my journey up. I got released from prison and I applied for a job to be a street sweeper. The guys you go around and you sweep up other people's litter, and the pay is like minimum wage. And the old me would have said, I'm not doing that. Mm-hmm. But when they offered me the job, I said, yeah.
Yeah.
I had this level of humility that wasn't there before. And I would say I learned more in that job than any other job I've ever done.
Yeah.
By picking up people's litter.
What did you learn?
So there was a few small things that really got to me at first. One of the things I saw was I'd see parents walk into school with their children and the parents were sober and happy. It seems small, right? But it was massive for me because on my community, first of all, most of the dads weren't even there. And the mums who were there, they were stressed out and hungover and, often violent to the kids. That was pretty normal. But then there was other stuff. There was sometimes I see joggers in the park running and they'd stop and pick up some other person's litter and put it in the bin. Again, it seems small, right? Mm-hmm. But in my community, people wouldn't even put their own litter in the bin.
Right.
They just throw their litter on the floor.
Yeah, maybe this is your first witnessing of compassion.
Yeah.
Or something in that realm.
What was happening was my view of the world was changing. So when I said earlier, when I was 5, I made a decision that this world isn't a friendly place.
Right.
As I was witnessing these little demonstrations of kindness, my view of the world was going, well, maybe it's not as bad as I thought, And I remember the thing that nailed it for me was I used to sit by the train station in a town called Kingston in London. And there used to be lots of homeless people there. Mm-hmm. And I used to just sit there, and I used to smoke back then. And I'd sit there and have a smoke. And all the, wealthy white professionals going to work in their suits, going to London, would always stop and give them money and even bring them food. And that was really it for me. It was I always felt, because I grew up in poverty, there was this divide. There wasn't really for us different races. It was just only 2 races. It was the rich and the poor. That was it. And when I saw them giving all this stuff to the poor people, it was that was it. My view, I couldn't unsee it. I'd seen it. It was the world isn't what I thought it was.
Yeah.
It's more friendly than I gave it credit for. There's actually good people out there.
Yeah.
And that's when I felt more comfortable to ask for help, because I was less afraid that someone might tell me to go away or I might be rejected.
Or worse.
Or worse, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought, well, if the world's a bit more friendly, maybe if I ask someone for help, someone might actually give me help. And so I did. And that's how the change came, and I got sober,
You say you weren't a religious man, but I experience you as a spiritual person, especially in the reverence you have for the Gaelic traditions and in some of the work that you're now doing. When does that I mean, is this the beginning of the spiritual journey? Like that, from that moment of being in that padded cell and not feeling alone for the first time to being able to ask for help?
It was for me, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I grew up, my mum was Irish Catholic, but I struggled to have a relationship with God because of what the Catholic Church done to my mum.
Right.
So it was like, I associated God with the Catholic Church. But then when I had that experience in the prison cell, I experienced God as spirituality, as something separate from religion. It was like a feeling of not being alone.
Yeah.
And so when I got sober at the age of 25. I've been sober ever since, like 15 years now. But I found it pretty easy to connect with a higher power. But I went on this journey of all the religions. You know, I went and sat in Buddhist temples, and I sat in mosques, and I sat in Sikh temples, and I went the whole way around to research it all. And then eventually I stumbled across a Native American sweat lodge. And a Native American elder from the Blackfoot tribe in Alberta, Canada. And that really touched me.
Yeah.
And so that then started my journey into, okay, well, what was the religion here on our lands before?
Prior to
Christianity.
Yeah.
And what I discovered was a spirituality that was very similar to what the Native Americans believed in.
Earth-based spirituality.
Earth-based spirituality. You know, the moon, the stars, the cycles of the sun, and the trees, and connecting, getting your feet on the ground. And that for me was where this fascination with our history and our lineage was born. It was like, crikey, all the nomadic and native people of lands all around the globe had the same pretty much religion. Yeah. And it was all based in respecting the earth.
Yeah. And the same understanding, the same reverence. Because it comes before technology. It comes before the written word. It comes before the doctrine and the books. And so that's why we see that the similarities when indigenous cultures gather, pray, have their walking songs, is because it's actually the only thing that's real. You know, when you get into those spaces, when you feel that, when you tap into the elements, that's really cool. Yeah. And now through your curiosity and through your exploration of your culture, what have you found, and where are you at with it now? Because I see you applying this to your work.
Yeah.
And bringing in this earth-based spirituality into the healing space.
Yeah, that's right. So I followed the Good Red Road, which is the Blackfoot traditions, and I'm going out to the Pine Ridge Reservation this year to do my Sundance, to honour that tradition that brought spirituality back into my life in a way that really resonated.
Yeah.
And, you know, like educating the people on my lands about their culture, you know, because a lot of the people who I come into contact with, the only culture that they have is like drinking or fighting, you know, and it's like, let me introduce you, let me tell you the history of our people, how we were actually really spiritual people. And then the Romans came and they was like, how do we build a fort so we can get you to live in it, so we can tax you to live in it? How can we do that when you pay so much love and respect to that 200-year-old tree?
Yeah.
So they went away and they came back with Christianity and was like, see all that religion you've got, that's pagan.
Right.
And pagan is a derogatory term. So it's a way of saying, crikey, you lot believe in all that crazy stuff to do with nature and the cycles.
Meanwhile, Christianity adopts the pagan rituals and times of the year and aligns their traditions to the same kind of solstices, right? And the natural markers of sun cycle, and kind of co-opt them.
Yes and no.
Say more.
So our cycle went around a 28-day cycle of every full moon.
13 moons.
So we had 13 full moons in our thing. And then Julius Caesar created the Julian calendar, which brought it down to 12 months. So I believe that was a direct attack on our culture and our spirituality. It's like, we need to disconnect them from that moon cycle they do.
Yeah.
And the best way we're going to do it is go, no, listen, we've got a new advanced thing.
Yeah.
This is actually the new calendar.
Yeah. And it permeates through the culture now. We don't even have the 13th floor on elevators. You know, they've removed the cycle of 13, which is the number of the divine feminine.
I've got it tattooed on me.
But they've literally demonized this pagan number of 13 to the point where they won't even put the number 13 on an elevator button.
Yeah.
Like, that's how deep it has gone to get us off of the natural rhythm and cycle of nature.
Yeah, and it's an indoctrination.
Yeah.
And one of the other ways that they done it, after the Romans eventually left, the Anglo-Saxons came to our lands. And one of the things that they done was replace our language, which would be known as Ancient Brittonic, with English. And one of the ways they done that was by making it a low privilege language. So if you were a doctor or a judge or someone who worked in a bank or anyone in a position of power, the Anglo-Saxons made it, you had to know English. Now, if you were opposed against the Anglo-Saxon invasion, you were like, I'm not learning their language. But if you didn't learn their language, you'd have no access to doctors, any of the resources, any of the vital resources, schools,
all of
that. And so that was like one of the ways another way that the Anglo-Saxons destroyed our culture.
Yeah.
You know? So when I look at our history, it was like, we were the first nation to be colonized. You know, the Romans, the Vikings, the Anglo-Saxons, you know, and our culture was so destroyed so long ago, you know, we attach ourselves to other cultures. That's why you see that a lot of white people are really drawn to Native American spirituality, and I believe it's because that's probably as close to our own spirituality before it was destroyed so long ago.
Yeah.
You know? So it's like a reframing of our own history and how actually we are all connected, and really there's only two classes. You know, there's two races, the rich and the poor.
Yeah.
And it's always been that way, I believe.
It's more than a reframing. It's a remembrance.
It's a remembrance.
I think it's an appropriate point to say here, you know, you've come from this background of poverty and all that you've just shared. Like I said, now you're a father of 3 daughters. You have land. You're back on the land. You're bringing men into ceremony, into these traditions, into these old ways. And alongside the CIP project, you're also doing rites of passage for men.
That's right.
And so I just want to announce right this second that Michael and Sacred Sons are collaborating on a rites of passage experience called Remembrance.
Remembrance, yeah.
And to bring the remembrance not only from those who have the Gaelic ancestry, but for those who are wishing to seek and to remember. Yeah. And so could you just speak a little bit to that and to the work that you're, and the energy that you're putting into your land?
Yeah, so it's really important for me when I moved to Devon, I moved from London out to Devon, and I'd done all this research around my own lineage. And then I'd done research into this bit of land where I lived, you know, and there was a tribe who lived on this bit of land in Devon called the Dumnonian tribe. And Dumnonian, the root word of that comes from a Latin word to dominate. And the Romans, when they invaded, described the tribe, the Dumnonian tribe, as like an impenetrable wall. They were trying to get to Cornwall to, you know, all the spiritual sites so they could, you know, try and mess about with them, and they couldn't get past the Dumnonian tribe.
Wow.
And so the language that they spoke is Cornish. And so that's some of the stuff that I bring through. When I hold a sweat lodge on my land, I sing songs in Cornish, you know, and the language and the food and the stories and the games, all of these things.
The culture.
The culture, yeah, the richness.
The culture, not only the culture, because again, this is not to like adapt Native American culture, but culture in its place. Culture in that land where it has happened for centuries.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, this bit of land I've got, it's very close to the St. Michael ley line. and it's like 40 minutes from Glastonbury, so it's 25 acres in an area of outstanding natural beauty. And that's where we're going to be bringing the men, is there, getting them out into nature in this old oak forest and reconnecting them, you know, with their own culture. And like you said, it doesn't have to be just Gaelic culture.
Yeah.
You know, we've had guys come from, you know, all around the world before, and it's like, share with me your culture. And often at times they're like, I don't know. And it's like, great, go and find out and bring it back.
Yeah.
Because before money, that's how riches were exchanged. It's like, oh, let me show you this recipe of food. Can I trade you this song?
Yeah.
Have you heard the story of this?
The storytelling was big ways to transfer energy through the mythology and through the stories. Yeah.
And that's why you see a lot of historical stories have similarities in them.
Yeah.
Because I believe they were exchanged through the ancient trade routes across Europe.
And so, and we're doing that in our own way. You know, we got connected through the technology of social media, and Sacred Sons came to Devon for an EMX, and Kale came out to your land and to some of the men that you're working with. And I just think it's really beautiful to see that it's happening once again. And it's not to say that we are the only ones or we're somehow special. It's just that we are once again participating in this old way of remembrance and exchange and of culture.
Yeah. My brother Kale.
Let's talk about it. He's over there fighting right now.
Let me tell you this.
Yeah.
When Kale came to me and he mentioned about culture to me, and I said, if I tell the truth about my culture and the history of the Irish people and the Unlook Shul, it's going to upset a lot of people, because Britain still owned the north of Ireland.
Right.
And a lot of people in the UK oppose that. They're like, that's our land now.
Right.
And Kale was like, but that's the story. That's your story. That's the story of your people. So you got to tell it.
Yes.
So a lot of the inspiration came from him.
Wow.
You know, so when you put that title on Kale of cultural innovator, like, it's accurate.
Yes.
He came to my land and inspired me, you know, and I'm grateful for him. You know, he brought me here, and then I came and I saw what you were doing, and it was like, this is a movement that aligns very much to my vision of how I want to live my life.
Yes.
Ultimately, I want to be part of something that is reducing the human suffering on this planet.
Absolutely.
And it's like, I'm doing that anyway. And here's an organization that's doing it as well. So the collaboration seemed like a thing that, you know, was good and worth doing. Yeah,
and I think it's also important to say, you know, we were blessed to go back to Scotland, and we did a prime leadership training, and we were inviting men from all around Europe. And it's not in an attempt for us to return with the elixir, but we're looking to find the others. And so here you are, you know, and it's not that mission has been accomplished. It's that there are other men on this planet who are choosing to tap into that goodness and to tap into the reality that not only is change possible, but it's inevitable. And so here we sit in this ancient future, in our time and place in history, as men, as embodied men. And one of the things I respect about you most, above all, above the resilience and above the ability to come back, is that you are a devoted father. And the way that you talk about your daughters and the way that you miss them. You know, this is something that just really touches my heart, and we need more of it. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about fatherhood with you. And you said something really profound to me, you know, before the cameras are on, which is that how important it is to stay when it's hard.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of talk out there, and there's a lot of encouragement to fucking leave when it's hard and to get comfortable. And so can you speak a little bit more about that? Like, why is that important for you? Why is it important for you to stay when it's hard?
Yeah, so for me, one of the big things about breaking the cycle was doing the things that my father wouldn't do.
Yeah.
And one of the things my father wouldn't do is stay. Hence why I got 14 other brothers and sisters.
Right.
And so for me, it was like going away, because it was easy to be kind and loving and spiritual at one of these events.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But the real work is like, can you take this and integrate that into your home? And that for me was where the real work was.
Absolutely.
It's like sitting with my wife, eye to eye, and having a conversation with her.
Yeah.
Using I statements. You know, it sounds simple because this is what we're used to. This is what we do.
This is what we train.
We train in this, right? But for two people who've grown up in dysfunctional families to do that, that's huge. It's groundbreaking stuff. It's
groundbreaking because you nor your wife had the example, right? And so this is a reemergence of how do we do this? How do we write this? How do we in fact become those cycle breakers?
And I want to share with you something really important, Adam, because this was like a light bulb moment for me. So when I was about 2 years into meeting my wife, I would have these moments where we would have beautiful connection. We'd be sitting watching a movie, everything was good, everything was beautiful. And then I'd get this agitation in me, like an itchiness, like I want to do something. I want to pick my phone up, or I want to go to the gym, or I couldn't settle comfortably into that space. And luckily, my wife had done a bit of work herself, and she was like, I just want to check out with you, what's going on here? Because everything seems fine, but you can't rest into this. And I was like, I don't actually know. I need to go away and find out. And so I went away, done some work, and what came out of that work was that growing up, anyone who I loved hurt me.
Right.
And here I've got this woman showing up, loving me. There's a bit of me back here going, is she gonna hurt you like everyone else did?
Wow.
And so it creates this agitation that makes me wanna leave. And it was like, this is how it was manifesting with this woman I love.
Yeah.
And the strategy to cope with that is, well, I'm just gonna end it. So at least I've got some control over it. And I said to this guy, where I was going through this process, I said, so what do I do? This is great data, but what do I do with it? He's like, you go back and you tell it to her like you're telling a news story, like you're a reporter. And so I sat in front of her and I said, listen, you know, that in these moments where we should have beautiful connection, there's a part of me that's worried you're gonna hurt me just like everyone else hurt me.
Yeah.
And I wanna run. And she was like, do you know, Michael, I'm so glad you've said that, because I thought maybe you'd fallen out of love with me, or maybe you weren't attracted to me anymore. And I was like, no, I love you so much that if you hurt me or betrayed me,
it would be devastating.
It would like destroy me.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to walk away from this to protect myself from that pain.
And to protect that 5-year-old boy.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Yeah. And that was my first experience of intimacy. You know, for me, intimacy is, you break the word down, into me see.
Yes.
It's like letting her see that 5-year-old boy. Like, this is me in all my pain, all my fears, all my insecurities. And like, I was convinced if I show her this, she's gonna be like, whoa, you're really messed up, bro.
Yeah.
Like, you're too much for me. And it was the complete opposite.
Yeah.
She was there with tears in her eyes going, wow, here you are as a man bringing all of you to me. Like, I love you so much for that.
Wow.
And we hugged and we cried, and it was like, wow, man, I'm gonna marry this woman. I'm gonna marry this woman. And I'm gonna have kids with this woman, you know, and...
That's really beautiful.
Yeah, I love her, Adam.
Yeah.
She's an angel. And
no, I can feel it on, I can feel it. I can feel it on you, man. It's beautiful.
And so for me, that's a lot of the work that I try and infuse in men, is like, be a good dad.
Yeah.
You know, be a good husband and give 100% of your 50%. You know, don't leave
Give 100% of your 50%.
Yeah, right. So if you're doing more than your 50%, like, you're over-functioning. So just stay in your 50%, but give 100% of it.
Yeah.
So rock up to that relationship.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note too, because you touched on it here, but we do this work on these weekends. It's easy to be around other brothers, other individuals who don't need any coaxing into being spiritual. And oftentimes we can create a mini utopia here. But the real work, you know, we train here. The real work is what we do when we go home. The real work is what do we do when no one is watching. The real work is what do we do when our children are watching. And this is my work too. You know, I haven't arrived anywhere. I'm still a work in progress, as I imagine you are as well.
Me too.
Yeah.
But check this out. If you imagine every parent made a pledge, and the pledge that they made and lived their life by is that I'm going to create a better human being than me.
Yes.
What you'd have is a new generation of children that are more emotionally available, more connected to spirituality and the planet.
Yes.
That would probably get us out of the mess that we're in right now.
Yeah. I don't like to pass it on to the next generation just yet, because we are those children. Because I'm looking at a child of this earth right now, and our work's not done. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I hear you. And yes, my sons have been in sweat. I know your daughters have been in sweat. You know, like I was expressing to you how fortunate I feel for my boys. I have 3 boys, to have uncles, Uncle Sean, Uncle Bric, Uncle Kale, Uncle J-Mac, and they know them. They're asking about them. They're checking up on them. They're coming to the birthday parties. Like, this is important for me to have community, to have village. And it's not the village, in my case, it's not the village that I once imagined. It's not utopia. We live all around the world, and this is just the reality of where my life is. But it's a big fucking step. It's a big step towards that remembrance.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, we need people around us to model certain things.
Yeah.
And it's too much for just one man and one woman. We need the community.
Yes. And the women need each other. And the kids, all they want to do is play with other kids, you know?
Yeah, right.
Like that's what it is, and that's what I'm saying, man. I want to raise our kids together. I want to see our children laughing and dancing and singing these songs together. And so that's the ultimate remembrance. That's the ultimate mission. It's beautiful. And the reason why I'm saying that I don't want to pass it to the next generation just yet, and that our work is still here upon us, is because I also know that the story between you and your father wasn't over at the age of 1.
Yes, that's
and
right.
And that it was your resilience and steadfastness that called that relationship back into your life. Was it after you got out the last time?
Yeah, so I'll share the story with you, because this is a really important around forgiveness.
Yeah.
And the power of forgiveness. You know, like when I first went to my first men's work movement back in 2014.
With MKP?
With MKP, yeah. That was one of the pieces of work that I took there, was my anger at my father.
That's what a lot of men are showing up with.
Yeah, right.
It's a core wound that,
yeah.
This is why.
Yeah, right. And my thing was I was resentful. He was never there. He left before I was 1. He slept with loads of women. I got 3 sisters the same age. He beat my mum, and there was like loads of stuff. And I got invited to the idea of forgiving him for knowing that when he was born, he wasn't an evil person, that he had a backstory, just like I did.
Yeah.
Same as I wasn't born an evil person.
Yeah.
And if I could invite that idea of forgiveness in, would I be willing to have a relationship with him? And that for me at the time was really difficult, because he was a heroin addict. I was like, how can I have a relationship with a heroin addict? How can I have a heroin addict around my children? Yeah. And so I established, like, it needs boundaries. So he can't be high around my kids.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to give him money. Why? Because if I give you money, you buy drugs and you die of an overdose, well, I've contributed to your death. So I approached him. I said, I'd love to build a relationship with you. And I've got no investment in you getting clean. I'm going to love you just the way you are.
That's important.
Yeah. So, like, we can just be open and honest. Like, I'm going to love you as a heroin addict, but you don't ask me for money. And if you're high, I don't want you to come to my home and be around the kids.
Yeah.
He was like, oh, okay, I can respect that. And he did for the most part. Every now and again, he'd ask me for money, and I'd have to say, listen, Dad, I can't, but I will buy you some food shopping or some tobacco. What manifested out of that forgiveness was an open and honest relationship with a man who I hadn't really spoke to at all in my life.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that we only had 5 years left when I started that relationship with him again.
Yeah.
But when he died 2 weeks after my life story was published.
Yeah.
And some of the final exchanges we had was, he was like, I'm so proud of you, son.
Yeah.
You've done it. You've done what I couldn't do. You know, and when he died, all the other 14 children came to me. What was Dad like?
Yeah.
What song should we play at his funeral? What music did he like? What should we read?
Because you were of the children, you were the only one who chose to have that relationship.
Yeah, I was the only one to choose forgiveness.
Yeah.
And see his innocence. Doesn't mean it was okay him leaving.
Yeah.
But I could see that when he came out of his mother's womb, he wasn't an evil person.
Yeah.
Life chipped away at him, and because of the pain he had in his own childhood, he had to use heroin to numb it. He didn't have to, but he chose to.
Yeah.
So it was like a beautiful ending for me.
Yeah.
To his
for
life.
Him. I have to imagine there's a part of him that was redeemed, fulfilled by your willingness to have that relationship with him. You know, and it's still a tragedy.
Yeah.
It's still a tragedy for him to have passed in that way, but at least you had 5 years.
There's a big lesson in that story, Adam.
Yeah.
And it's about valuing, I would say, the most valuable resource we have, which is time. You know, like my dad would always say things like, you know, one day, son, I'd love to go back to Ireland with you. One day, son, I'd love to, maybe we could take a trip to the beach. One day, son, we'll go on holiday together to Spain or somewhere. And I was like, yeah, I'd love that, Dad. One day we will, you know, one day get some sobriety under belt, we'll do it.
Yeah.
And that one day never came.
Yeah.
And it was like, looking back now, I would give anything to have one more day with him, despite everything that happened. And so in that, there's an open invitation for anyone who might be watching to offer that same forgiveness to someone.
Yes.
You know, knowing that tomorrow isn't promised.
Yeah.
You know,
and that we truly don't know how long we have here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I only really learned that lesson after he'd gone.
Yeah. It's a beautiful story. Thank you for your willingness to share. This is just another example of how vulnerability is a superpower. And it's really been the mechanism that, what I'm hearing is that has been able to transform your life from your willingness to receive and ask for help, from your willingness to share your story, and your willingness to cultivate that relationship with your father, once again, with your wife and your children. I mean, this is what a man is, ladies and gentlemen. Straight up. This is what embodied masculinity is. We talk a lot about it, but this is what it is.
You too, Adam. You too.
Thank you, my brother, but this is about you, man.
I know. I'm sorry.
I'm here as a messenger, you know what I'm saying, and as a reflector, because you know, there's 8 billion stories that could be told on this planet, and I believe that this is a story that needs to be heard. So pick up the book, Young Offender, absolutely. Donate, research, look up Change is Possible. And I'm here to say that change is not only possible, it is inevitable if we're willing. And so with that, for the parents who are listening, for the brothers and sisters, for anyone who's going through it with addiction, recovery, incarceration, is there any final message or moment of inspiration that you can offer to someone who may be wondering for themselves if change is possible?
Yeah. I think the main message here is I'm like a template of that it is, but you have to do the work. So find an organization like Sacred Sons and their youth program, or if you're in the UK and, you know, we're a charity, so we help people who are predominantly struggling in poverty. Find an organization that's doing work like this.
Yes.
Because for me, that's what transformed my life.
Yeah.
Was this work. That's what I'm really here testament to. It's like, this work works. And that's it, full stop.
This work works. Michael, my brother, it is an honor and a pleasure and a privilege. And I look forward to being together on your land one day in the very near future.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Man. With that, Adam Jackson, Sacred Sons, Michael Maisey, Remembrance, Change is Possible, Young Offender. Go get the book. We're out, family. Peace.